working on how we are going to deliver news like that to you, tell those stories. We know the power of our words, and so do you, based on the emails that we get after every show. And what I just said is kind of how we decided to sum up last night in the coverage from this morning. But we thought you might find it interesting if we showed you how law enforcement described it, because Portland police and the Fed sent out two very different press releases this morning. Let's read how they started. First, this one from the Portland Police Bureau. Quote, a large group of more than 1,000 people gathered on Southwest 3rd Avenue outside of the Justice Center and Federal Courthouse in downtown Portland. For several hours, the group blocked traffic and vocalized in demonstration. Now, obviously, Portland police condemn what happened as the night went on, but that was a pretty matter-of-fact description of the early evening. Altogether, PPB referred to protesters as people 7 times. Now, let's read from the press release from Homeland Security. This is the first sentence. As they have for the past 54 days straight days, violent anarchists continue to riot on the streets of Portland as federal law enforcement officers work to diligently and honorably to enforce federal law by defending federal property and the lives of their fellow officers. All in all, DHS referred to the protesters 3 times as violent anarchists and referenced riots and rioters 16 times. The words anarchist and riot don't even appear in the PPB version of the events. This morning, during our little tour downtown, Oregon's U.S. Attorney Billy Williams had an opinion on the words being used by the media, accusing media outlets of describing the events with kid gloves.
These aren't late-night demonstrations. This is criminal activity. Okay. There's a difference. Okay. What you have failed in the media have failed to distinguish between, you seem unwilling to call people engaged in criminal conduct as criminals, as opposed to lawful protesting.
Well, some may argue that the way the federal agents are acting is criminal too, and we're not saying that.
Argue away on that.
But we're not saying either, so.
Well, so I'm just saying there needs to be a distinction made between lawful, constitutionally protected protest and this.
And he is absolutely right. 100%. Everybody does, to make the distinction between legal protests and illegal behavior. But here's the thing, we do. Let's take the term riot, for example, because a lot of you tweet us and email me furious all the time that we're not categorizing these entire protests as riots every single night and calling everyone out there a rioter. But there is a reason, a specific reason that we don't do that, because rioting is a very specific legal term. You can be charged with rioting. It is a crime. So we need to be very careful that we're only using it to describe people who are actually taking part in a riot. Otherwise, we risk accusing people of crimes that they aren't committing. And not everyone in the crowd down there is clashing with police. There are observers and pastors and journalists and politicians and others. Not everyone is throwing a bottle or setting a fire. So our viewer Dan Cole asked the key question: what is the process for declaring a riot? Who gets to declare it, and what's being done to change it? Well, the good news is your answer is right on the Portland Police Bureau's website. They define a riot as 6 or more persons engaging in tumultuous and violent conduct and thereby intentionally or recklessly creating a grave risk of causing public alarm, excluding persons who are engaged in passive resistance. I want to repeat that last bit, excluding persons who are engaged in passive resistance. See, there is a huge difference between being part of a riot and being near a riot, and that's why we need to be careful about who we are calling rioters. It's also why there's that big issue about tear gas. I mean, one of the reasons why there's an issue with tear gas and why it's so controversial, because when it's deployed, it hurts everyone it touches, not just the people who are breaking the laws and rioting. And while that topic continues to be debated and litigated, the importance of the precision of our words is not.